Hello guys, hope you very enjoyed this event. This is Thomas.
This is Christina.
And we are very happy to be here and do this talk for you. So lay back, relax, and let us tell your story.
So I want to introduce you to this image. Everybody knows this image. Everybody has seen this image. Everybody laughed about this image. The problem with this image is it's not imaginative. Most projects in IT are like that. So nobody knows what he's talking about. Every role is speaking about something else. And we try to approach this and clear this up, to get a better understanding throughout the whole software lifecycle. The communication, to bring the communication through the roles together. With this, I want to introduce to our story map for today. Christina.
Yeah, as you know, a story is always divided into 3 acts: the beginning, the confrontation, and the ending. And our talk is that doing as well. So at the beginning, we are going to cover a little bit what is storytelling and how we can use it. In the middle, we are giving you a short introduction to behavior-driven development and how to implement storytelling in code. And at the end, we'll give you a small conclusion to what we have covered so far. So let's move on to our first act, storytelling.
So, tell me, Christina, what exactly is storytelling?
Well, storytelling is everything. So you have storytelling in advertisement, you have it in business communication, you have it in the cinemas, in the movies, in literature, so nearly everywhere. So speaking about storytelling as a general term, it's the activity to tell or write a story. When Thomas and I talked about storytelling, we thought about, well, a story has characteristics. What does that mean? We're taking ideas, thoughts, and bringing them into form which user can interact, user can do something. When we talked a little bit more about the topic, we thought, okay, storytelling is a very general term. So when we speak about storytelling in software engineering, we need to define a definition, how we use storytelling.
So our definition of storytelling is taking something, mostly a requirement, break them down, take the ideas out of the requirements, and transform them in concrete forms, and bring them to a level of understanding for everybody in a room, in an audience, or in a project, in an IT project. It is important that everybody in the room or in the roles understands exactly the same about the problem, so we can solve this together. A simple idea about this is this image.
Do you know what a new parameter is? So please, show up. Do you know it? No?
No.
Really? When you're in a retrospective, in a Scrum meeting and so on, the Scrum Master is going to ask you, well guys, how do you feeling today? How was the sprint? Our Scrum Master always asks us for telling us on a number of a scale from 1 to 5. So we need to express our feeling to feeling I'm a 1 or feeling I'm a 5. That's not working, because people not thinking in numbers, we are thinking in emotions, we are thinking in behaviors, we are thinking in images. And that's the reason why it is better to use this. So in order to use with a mood parameter, it's best practice to take pictures and to work with them. So for example, when we are looking at this mood parameter picture, we can say, okay, when we are feeling very happy, it is a sunny day. But when we are feeling very frustrated, when we are angry, it's the end of the world, then probably I would say, wow, it's stormy, it's pretty stormy. So always keep in mind that by telling a story, you need to visualize something, because people think in pictures.
But not only do we think in pictures, we write it down with talking, we do stories, and have them written down, right? So in software development, we cannot always do everything in pictures. Sure, we have our diagrams and we have our UI interfaces and stuff like that, our scribbles and stuff like that, but still, we need to have some facts and figures so we can relate to them. So now there is a tool and a method called behavior-driven development. With this, we can lift our communication to one level, one level of understanding. So what I mean by that is, we take a requirement, very complex requirement, and break them down into behaviors. We don't talk about technical stuff, so we just want to get it right. How should it work? What is the user expecting? Behavior-driven development gives us an agile and lean approach to do that, as well as as well as
words.
Yeah, words. Sorry. We have to approach. We have an agile approach of behavior-driven development, as well as a structured and natural-based language. We use keywords in behavior-driven development, like given, then, when, to formulate our behavior for different features, for different requirements. I go into that a little later in detail, but now I want to introduce you to our project, with which we actually try to solve this problem.
We prepared a little epic for you so that at the end you know how to work from a project idea until the implementation code. So let me first introduce you our Alchemy Compass. Everybody knows that you're at home and you wanted to cook something and you only have a few ingredients in your kitchen. So most of the time you're thinking, what can I cook with it? And that's what we took and form an idea. So when we are looking at our requirements, our Gourmet Compass should do two things. The Gourmet Compass should display ingredients and cuisine type, and at the end, when we select ingredients and cuisine type, a list of recipes from where we can choose. So most of the time when we are talking about implementing an epic or a feature, we are not working with the requirements in that way. We are working with user stories. So based on requirements, we formulate the user story. So did we are. So we thought about, okay, what would be a very good and very simple user stories which we can show to you. We've chosen, as user, I want to select from displayed ingredients in cuisine so that I receive a list of recipes. Very simple, isn't it? In order to provide you a little bit that you can visualize it in your head what the idea should be looking like, we also provide you a little screenshot of how the application should look in the end. So when we look at the picture, we have three areas. The first one is the area where the user can select its ingredient. The second one should be the area where you can select one cuisine type, and at the end, in the bottom of the web application, you should see a list of recipes. So now when we talked about requirements and user stories, we can start by doing it by formulate the acceptance criteria.
Right. So we talked before about behavior-driven development and about the keywords in behavior-driven development. Now let's get a little bit in action. We have our user story. So we break them down to how should it behave? What should it give to us? How should it work? We create a feature file in behavior-driven development, which is basically more than just a file. You can use it as a specification, as an executable specification, as a living documentation, as well as a as well as a UI test case. So a feature file contains a couple of keywords, which is obviously feature, which describes very simple the feature which is tested, which should be tested. It describes the scenario. In one feature file, there can be 1 to n scenarios. But please think about it. Don't use it like crazy. We just want to test or use it as little as possible and as much as needed. A scenario describes a behavior. That's it. In our case, the user selects at least 3 ingredients to receive a list of recipes. Each scenario does have at least 3 keywords, which is given then. And these 3 keywords describing the setup of the test case or the acceptance criteria is describing what should happen, and it is describing what the outcome is. If we use it in JavaScript, we do have the Cucumber.js, which is a library which uses Gherkin as a script language to translate the feature file into keywords, and translate the functions into actual JavaScript code. With that, we have the possibility to create our story and test it as well. This thing happens in the background. So basically, when you do behavior-driven development and the feature file, you don't need to code. You don't have to code. People who have no technical knowledge at all can write feature files, which comes in handy when you talk to POs who have never touched a keyboard in sense of coding, and a Scrum Master who has no clue what's going on. With that in mind, now we have a feature file, we have test examples, we have tests, and we provide this to our developers before they even start writing code. So we have a test-first approach, which comes in handy when you start implementing a scenario. Why is that? Developer can start to implement his code and knows exactly how much to implement as long as the scenario is failing. As soon as the scenario is passing, the code is implemented, the feature is implemented. With that, I give you code.
Thanks. Before we can think about the implementation of storytelling, we need to think about or talk about keywords. The important thing when you start coding in a story is that you aim to structure your code so that nearly everybody who's looking at your code understands what is happening. And that you can achieve by using a keyword. Of course, keyword is a very general term. So first we need to define, when we talk about keyword, what do we mean? When I talk about a keyword, I mean wrapping functionality into a class that is descriptive. So when we take our user story in order to find proper keywords to use in storytelling, we would say, okay, our user story is, as user, I want to select from displayed ingredients in cuisine so that I receive a list of recipes. So by thinking about that, I would choose 3 keywords: ingredients, cuisine, and recipe. Most of the time when you do that, you get a very huge list of keywords. So you need to consider, okay, is it too much, or do I need to shorten this list? How can I achieve that? I need to cluster the keywords. In our case, we would say, okay, cuisine and ingredients are pretty the same, so why not call it selection? So maybe you are now wondering, okay, now we have the keywords, but how can we use them in code? I would say pretty simple. The reason why you should use storytelling is you using this keyword to describe what the code is actually doing. So when we look at this code example, we are not seeing any for loops or if conditions and so on, because this logic is wrapped in the keyword. So let's look at this code. First of all, we are defining our selection, recipe, and our view. Afterwards, we are adding to the selection the ingredients, so like a tomato, chicken, or a cuisine type, Mediterranean. At the end, we are filter the recipe list by recipe.filter at selection get all. And in the end, we are render this list. So as you can see, there is no logic implemented. They are only used the keywords. What are the advantages by using storytelling? The code, the keywords, only changing when a behavior is changing. So when you change the feature or you're changing the user story. Second, you have shorter classes because you need to split up your features. You need to split up your code. You need to think about, okay, what is my code doing? Not how, the what is the important thing. As we promised, we will be talking a little bit legacy project. I've been working as an application engineer now for, I think, 4 years, and I had a lot of I worked with a lot of legacy code, and all the time I covered a few problems with them. They are lacking of structure, the naming was very bad, the classes were huge, the methods were huge, and you have no idea what the code is actually doing and how to change it. I think you also know this problem. So why not doing storytelling a legacy project? I think it's pretty simple as well. Let's take another code example. When you would like to use storytelling in a legacy project, you need to do 2 things. The first thing, try to understand what your code is doing. Not how the code is doing, but what the code does implement. Second, define your keywords and use them. So by searching proper keywords, you are working with the code and you get in touch which feature will be implemented or what has been implemented. So it doesn't matter if you're using a framework like Angular, Vue.js, React, whatever. It is important to know what the code, which story the code is telling. So let's take a look at this small example. In the first place, we are defining a selection, the recipe, because these are the keywords we are needed. In the second place, we are adding these keywords to the 2 controls that are used in the implementation. The first one is the broad controller. It was the implementation for the selection, so for selecting the ingredients and the cuisine type. And the second one, the selection controller, was used to render the list in the end. So the only thing what you needed to do in that way is to wrap around the framework and put in the keyword. I hope that makes sense to you. So now time is running. We have come to a conclusion so that you can see the whole picture, how storytelling is working in the whole software lifecycle. So Thomas, please.
To sum everything up, we have a life cycle, right? Everybody's agile, everybody knows lean. So we're working in iterations. Storytelling isn't any different in that. We need the whole organization to buy into that thing. Then we can start creating meaningful requirements and creating from these requirements, with the help of BDD, meaningful user stories and meaningful acceptance criteria. Because of the art how to use BDD, you can use it. You can use the acceptance criteria as living documentation as well as executable specifications. And as I mentioned before, nobody has to code anything in the first 3 steps, but everybody can work on it together and speak the same language. Every role in a project will understand what is going on. As soon as we go into implementation, the main advantage is that we know exactly what to do in the moment we're trying to implement the stuff. And that's it, actually. It can be pretty simple, but it's actually hard to get all the roles together and work with them together. It takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of training.
I think the important thing to mention is that storytelling is the part in the whole life cycle, and it's so difficult to begin at the beginning with the requirements and the user story and the acceptance criteria and take them and the wording into the code. So when you read the code, you know what the code is doing or what the feature is. So please keep that in mind and try to work on with keywords and what we talked about so far.
So, thank you so much.
Brilliant. Fantastic for keeping us awake. So I think I didn't fall asleep, not a second, not at all. I think we got some questions on Slido. Is it? Maybe they're there. Yes. I think you addressed the first one. So, but what is the most important things to convince the company to migrate to BDD?
Thomas?
The most important thing is to describe all the advantages BDD has. I mean, you have a learn curve with BDD, and you have to get used to using BDD. But the most important thing to convince management is to prove that it is working and to show how it is working. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, leading by example is always very important.
Yeah.
The next question is if the features are more technical, how do you translate that?
Good question, I would say. Because we are also talking about this, I think, 1 or 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
It's pretty difficult. Thomas, what was our solution for it? I think
our
mix it up,
solution was that we have to. I think our solution is that we have to actually use BDD with common sense. You can't put everything into feature files. That's not possible. Feature files, or BDD, is mainly used in UI. Other than that, we do have acceptance test-driven development, where you can actually use, where we can use acceptance test-driven development with technical tasks. Technical tasks are most likely not testable via UI, so you have to go in the backend, and you have to do this with unit tests, and there comes in acceptance test-driven development. Yes.
Right. The next question: would you say that the real-world example of BDD stories also look as clean as the simple examples?
Actually, yes. I'm working with storytelling in a very big project, and of course it depends on the concept you use. So when you're first starting with storytelling, you keep in mind that how huge should be a file, or how huge should be my starting point. So it also be possible to say, okay, I'm using a keyword in a keyword, or to separate keywords. The coding part itself is not the difficult thing. The difficult thing is to use the proper keywords or to find the proper keywords. Thomas and I talked about this, how to find proper keywords, and I told him that most of the time I'm trying to find nouns in the user story or in the acceptance criteria or in the requirements to formulate them. And then I think about, okay, how big they can be or how big they should be. And when I see, okay, well, maybe that's too much, it's too unclear now, I split them up. I hope this answered the question.
Just one more sentence. If a BDD story or BDD scenario gets too big, you have really to rethink if the scenario isn't too complex. I mean, there are some ands and there are some thens and there are some whens, which is okay, but if it gets too big and too not clean anymore, so that you can grasp the idea of this scenario, then it's too big, so you have to split it up. That's it for BDD and...
Speaking of splitting up things, so what's the best format? And now it comes the next bullshit bingo term, blockchain is on. Nobody's shouting bingo or bullshit, whatever. So what's the best format for putting the stories into blockchain?
I want to answer that. I have no clue because I have no idea about blockchains. I don't work with this technology and I haven't read too much about it, so I cannot answer that question.
Right, maybe, and there's no answer for the next question. What's the best solution if there is a communication problem between the different stakeholders and constituents?
Yeah, that's that's a very difficult question. A question we all fight, we all know. I mean, to be honest, you have to get out the personalities. You have to get out egos, and you have to get out. You just have to be a professional, right? And what BDD does is makes communication simple. You have to grab the idea and grasp the idea and live the idea. It's a mindset, right? It's not only a method or a tool, but it's a mindset. But the communication problem between businesses is only possible to solve if everybody is on board with that.
Yeah, and if you sit together and try to speak the same language. So.
Sit together, have a beer, have a coffee,
yeah,
talk to each other.
I think sitting together and talking about a topic is the most important thing, also in software engineering.
Yes, and it's best to write a memo about this tip. It's very, very important.
Yes. Personally, I love being sitting together around, having a piece of paper and a pen and drawing what we are talking so far. So that's the best thing to work on.
And there's one thing more, not just talking, it's also about listening and asking yourself, what does the other want to tell me? That's another secret of storytelling, is the story listening. Because quite often people start talking during they listen and they never understand. So thank you. I think that was a fantastic presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.